Hi, I'm Brie Allison with the Power of the Patient Project, and welcome to our new segment, Tell Us Your Story. Today we are joined by Robert Koshinskie, a patient coping with pancreatic cancer, who has just written a new book called One Path Among Many, in which he shares his journey as a patient. He is also the author of two other books on the topic of critical and analytical thinking, and has enjoyed a very accomplished career as an expert in business decision making. Welcome, Mr. Koshinskie.
Thank you, Bree. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. So, to start off, can you talk about your personal experience with cancer?
Yeah, this all happened this year, 2022, and it actually started off as a fairly good year. My wife and I were employed. We were looking forward to doing some things this year. And then I even had a checkup, my annual physical in January that came back clean. So everything looked good. And then in February, I started to experience some abdominal pain after eating. And then it started to radiate up into my chest and my back. And it got to be pretty painful. So I spoke to my primary care physician, and his attitude was, well, could be a lot of things, but it's probably just a standard GI issue. So drink more water, eat more fiber, which kind of struck me because I was never the person to drown myself in 64 ounces of water every day. But I had a pretty good, healthy lifestyle. I ate a lot of, healthy foods and fibers and stuff. Anyway, followed his prescription for a few weeks. Didn't get better. In fact, it got worse. So he decided, well, we'll get you a GI consult. This is an expert in the field, and maybe they can figure this out, help figure this out. The problem was it was going to be 2 months before I could get to see a GI consult. So I asked my physician, is there any kind of a scan or something that could be done in advance? So when I go to the GI consult, we'd have some evidence. So he ordered a CT scan, and that scan was available in 1 month. So I persevered for the month until the scan came up. And when the scan came back, that's when my primary care physician called me back and said, look, I have some bad news. You have a tumor on your pancreas. So that was the first diagnosis that something was going wrong. And that's when it all started. And by the way, this kind of delayed diagnostic of pancreatic cancer is not at all unusual because the symptoms are so vague. There could be a lot of different kind of basic GI stuff. And this is part of the reason why pancreatic cancer is not caught sooner. There's no kind of a test that can be done. If you have, there's other kind of blood work that can be done that reveals you may have a problem like prostate cancer, but there is no such test for pancreatic cancer. So unless you happen to find this because you went in to see something else and it revealed the tumor, that's why it's caught later in the disease progression as opposed to earlier.
Well, that must have been a rough couple months waiting with pain. So what has treatment looked like for you since you got your diagnosis?
Right. So what they did was they decided to put me on infusion therapy. So there's different kinds of infusion therapies that are available. I was put on what's considered the gold standard. It's very aggressive. I've learned since that a lot of people can't tolerate it. So I've been fortunate that I've been able to tolerate it, even though there are side effects. And what it consists of is every 2 weeks, I go into the hospital. I'm being treated at Duke University, by the way, one of the leading cancer hospitals in the country, thank goodness. So every 2 weeks, I go into the hospital. And initially, they were giving me 2 drugs at the hospital. These drugs are delivered in fluid form. So there's a bag that hangs from an IV pole that goes through a pump. The pump is connected to a port. I actually have a surgically implanted port in my chest, just underneath the skin, which is like a cup. And then that cup has a tube that goes up over my collarbone and into a major vein to my heart. So it would take about 5 hours to deliver these 2 drugs at the hospital. And that was because there were little wait periods and the drug had to be set up and those sorts of things. Also, the drug is very toxic. So when it's handled by the nurses, they have like hazmat suits on almost. They have a gown and double gloves because they can't afford to get this on themselves. And then at the end of that, they would disconnect me from the hospital infusion pump and connect me to a home infusion pump. So it's a smaller pump. It's like a little fanny pack that you wear. And I wear that for 2 days. Now, around the halfway point of my therapy, which happened in July, the side effects of the therapy started to exhibit themselves more pronouncedly. So I was experiencing neuropathy, which is like a numbness in the fingers and hands. It also affects, like, sometimes my teeth feel numb. It feels like there's something in between my teeth when there's nothing there. It's very weird, some of the side effects, and fatigue and the like. And so this concerned the healthcare team because these neuropathies and other side effects can get worse over time. And so one of the drugs, one of the more aggressive drugs that actually has platinum in it, they decided to stop that. That was stopped, I don't know, 2 or 3 sessions ago. But again, I was fortunate that I was able to tolerate it that long because that was one of the more effective therapies. So then you go home and you're on that pump for 2 days until that drug is administered. Now, fortunately, my wife happens to be a nurse, and she's a nurse at Duke, and she works with cancer researchers. So, I mean, consider the benefit there, right? So she can not only navigate me to the hospital, she can also explain some of the medical things that are going on. And at home, she can take me off of the pump. So I don't have to go back to the hospital again to have the pump taken off. So she takes that off. And then for a few days, I actually feel not too bad because one of the drugs they put me on are steroids to help calm my stomach and some other things. But the steroids improve your appetite. They kind of give you a little steroid high. You feel pretty good for a few days. The problem is that even though you're weaned off of those steroids, generally a few days afterwards, then you're sort of in the dumps. You feel very fatigued. You don't feel very good. And then you kind of nose back up. So long story short, over a 2-week period, you sort of feel, not so great for the first week, and a little bit better the second week, and then it's time to go back and get another infusion treatment. So you're on this sort of up and down cycle all the time. And that's pretty common, I would think, for most patients. I'm on several different social network boards now where people talk about their cancer and treatment and the like. And that's a very common thing you hear, that you sort of get up days and down days and the side effects of the therapy and the like. So that's the typical therapy that I'm experiencing right now. And the difference, again, is that because they took me off of one of the drugs in the hospital instead of 5 hours, it's about half that time now. And also, I believe some of the side effects are reduced because they took me off of that. And that's the difference between the beginning of my therapy and where I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm. And dealing with the side effects and going to the hospital constantly, like, how do you stay positive throughout this whole experience?
So this is a really big issue, right? Especially with pancreatic cancer, which has a well-deserved reputation for being a killing disease. If you catch the pancreatic cancer early enough, very early, when it's just forming as a tumor, then there are surgical procedures you can do that are pretty effective. But once it starts to move off of the pancreas through what's called metastasis, then you don't really have many options except to try to slow it down. You can't really cure it. You can try to contain it and slow it down. And so when people hear that, obviously you don't want to hear that, right? It's like not great news. The way I've been dealing with it, and I talk about this in my book, I talk about 3 general areas. There's the emotional response, like the kick in the teeth you get when you first hear you have cancer, and how you feel about that, and how others around you, your family, your friends relate. There's the religious aspect, which is very strong because a lot of people have a religious perspective and they turn to their religious beliefs to help them through this. Even though I was raised in the Roman Catholic faith, and even though I went to 2 Jesuit colleges, I'm currently not a person of faith, right? So I don't rely on the religious aspects. And then I talk about the philosophical aspects. And specifically, I talk about kind of a Stoic philosophy about this stuff. And in essence, Stoic philosophy goes back to the ancient Greeks, of course. But in essence, the goal is to identify those things that you actually have some control over, which are few, and those things over which you have no control over, which are many. And if you try to control the things that you can't control, it's not going to work. You're not going to be happy. You're going to waste a lot of time. So, for example, the things I can control is I can decide to take therapy. I can decide to deal with the side effects, right, the best I can. I have no control over the effectiveness. It may work, it may not work. It may give me a longer life, it may not. And so once you sort of accept, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself. For me, once I sort of accepted my mortality, that even if I were cured of this cancer today, tomorrow I could have a heart attack and drop dead, or I could slip in the shower, or I could get some other disease. Everybody's mortal. Everyone's going to end up dying by some means. It's probably going to be some disease that comes in. The only difference between me before and after the diagnosis is the likelihood of me dying sooner than later is increased. That's really the only difference. And in fact, tonight I could take a shower and slip in the shower stall, and this is no longer an issue for me, right? So that's what's helped me. I don't know if I'd call it a positive attitude, but I don't feel depressed, at least not currently. I may at some future date. I don't feel hopeless. I don't feel those things that I thought I might feel at this point. I just sort of say, look, today's not such a great day. I'm going to take it easy. Maybe I'll sleep because I feel fatigued. And tomorrow, maybe that'll be a better day. Maybe I'll actually be able to do something that I want to do. I've taken up, I had meant to take up before my diagnosis, some basic woodworking. I took an interest in Japanese woodworking and the joinery techniques and the like. So for my birthday this year, my wife got me a simple woodworking table. And that's what I do now. In those days that I feel good, I go there and I sort of spend a couple of hours doing woodworking stuff, learning how to cut angles and wood and that sort of thing. So I think when people get these kinds of diagnoses and they find themselves in these positions, one thing I would urge them to do is find something to do. I mean, there's always something you can do. Maybe, like now I have trouble reading sometimes because it's affecting my vision a little bit and also the focus. All right, so I don't read the same way I used to, but I do read still. Or maybe you like planting, or maybe you like mowing the lawn, whatever it is that sort of you enjoy doing, that's what you should be focusing on those days when you can do those things. And don't focus on what might happen tomorrow or 2 months from now or a year from now, because there's no way to predict that. There's no way for any of us to know what's going to go on.
Well, your outlook is very inspiring, and I never really considered thinking about cancer being that way, but so what changes in your life did you make after you were diagnosed?
So there were some pretty quick changes right up front. One of them was that I realized there's no way I could do the work I was doing anymore. I was contracting with a firm on the development of a new medical device, and the kind of work that you do is it requires focus and working with other people, and I thought I was dealing with that pretty well actually, but in retrospect, I didn't realize how much the pain I was experiencing was affecting my work product. So I was getting kind of grumpy and I was making mistakes that I shouldn't have been making. And I didn't really see that at the time. So once the diagnosis came in and I realized there's going to be on chemotherapy, I contracted my employer and I said, look, I simply can't do this anymore. So that was one of the things. Once I was into the therapy, some other changes were the kind of cancer. I have pancreatic cancer as well, what's called the head of the pancreas. And the head of the pancreas, it turns out, is what produces digestive enzymes. So it's what digests the food that you eat and gives you the nutrients you need. Well, when the disease hits that part of the pancreas, those enzymes aren't properly produced. So now I have to take medication before every meal, which are these artificial enzymes, if you will, to help break down the food. So what I eat actually gives me some nutrition. So my eating habits have become more structured now, where you might be able to say, oh, I feel like having a candy bar, or I'm going to eat later or have this now. I have less options doing that. I have to sort of think through the day about what am I going to eat, how much of it, when am I going to eat it, and then take these pills. And then right after you take the pills, then you have to eat. I can't wait because the stuff starts working immediately. And then just kind of giving way, I guess, is the biggest change. As I think I said earlier, I was sort of raised at a time when you're expected to be independent and don't complain and just get on with it. And so I've had to be able to give way. decisions that I might have made by myself now, either my wife or my caregivers, if they tell me to do something, I try not to be resistant because what's the point to be resistant? When I find myself not able to do something, I cut myself some slack. It's like, well, that's one of the many things over which I have no control. So I'm not going to be hard on myself about that. And I think that's been the biggest difference in just headset and lifestyle. I'm sure I'm not always compliant. You'd have to ask my wife about that. But I try to be compliant. I try to be attentive and listen more and talk less if I can.
And you also just came out with a new book. So can you talk to us about what led you to write your book, One Path Among Many, and what it means to you?
Right. So when I was diagnosed, and again, at the initial stages, I didn't know what to expect. I had read that if pancreatic cancer isn't treated, it's probably a 6-month window that you have for longevity. And even with treatment, depending on your advanced stages, it could be a year, perhaps, maybe 18 months. So I didn't know how much time I had. And I thought, a lot of questions that my wife and I encountered and we're trying to address in the way that I'm dealing with this, maybe it would be of use to somebody else. So I had been taking notes. I had some thoughts about what I might want to share with somebody else, and I decided that it should be kind of an amalgam of technical information. Like, look, these are terms that you should know. This is the kind of drugs you might use. These are the side effects. These are the procedures you might go through. So that's one part of the book. And then there's a more meditative part of the book, and I referred to this earlier on how I'm viewing this from an emotional, a religious, a philosophical viewpoint. And I don't really give any prescription. In fact, I say in the book, I'm not going to give you the 10 steps that you should follow because everybody's path is different. I can tolerate a treatment other people can't. This gentleman who wrote the foreword of the book, his name is Stephen Merlin. He's actually a 10-year pancreatic cancer survivor, very unusual, but there he is. So a lot of the statistics and the like apply to the general population of cancer patients. It doesn't apply to the individual. You could have the average lifespan, you could have a shorter lifespan, or you could have a longer lifespan. There's no way to know in advance. And so the book, what I had hoped it would do is say, look, here's sort of the facts, the technical facts of the treatments and the like. Here's how I'm looking at it, which you may or may not find useful. And here's some parting thoughts about mortality and just trying to get your mind around the things that might, bother you. So if it turns out that this is useful to some segment of the population, I'll be happy. I have been asking people, for example, on LinkedIn, who I know, to just share the link with people because even though pancreatic cancer is not, it's a relatively rare form of cancer. It tends to be one of the more deadly forms, but it's relatively rare. So, but some of the stuff I talk about applies to cancer in general. There's a lot of cancers out there. So I think it could be a benefit not just to the pancreatic cancer patient, but to the cancer patient in general. And everybody knows somebody, it seems these days, who just got diagnosed with cancer and they don't know where to turn. They don't know who to talk to in life. So hopefully the book will be of some benefit to those patients and their families.
It sounds like it would definitely help people on their cancer journey or family members, like you said. And finally, what's something that you wish everyone would know about your cancer journey, or what advice do you have for someone who is on their own cancer journey? You kind of touched it, but.
Yeah, I just underscore, I guess, it's to sort of be attentive to what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Don't get so wrapped up in the horrible things could happen, because there's other horrible things that could happen, auto accidents and whatever else that might befall anybody. Try to stay focused on the here and now and moment to moment what you're going through. Recognize that you're going to have some bad days and you're going to have some good days, and you just have to sort of try to roll with the punches as best you can. And just accept perhaps that this is a difficult thing for a lot of folks, but just kind of accept that this is just one of those things in life. Yeah, genetics probably has some play in it. definitely lifestyle. I mean, I was not a smoker. There were times in my life when I probably drank more than I should have, especially in my college days and the like. But generally a healthy lifestyle, and here I am with it. So there's a certain randomness to it. There's not necessarily a fault or specific cause and effect relationship. It happened, and you can lament that, or you can try to just deal with it today and forward going. And that would be my recommendation. Try to do the latter. Try to not beat yourself up or look for the reason why it occurred. Take a look at what you can do right now and try to do those things you can do.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story and your inspiring words. Unfortunately, that concludes our interview for today. So again, Mr. Koshinskie, thank you for joining us and sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So please make sure to check out Mr. Koshinskie's new book, One Path Among Many. If you or someone you know has recently received a cancer diagnosis, the book is available on Amazon as a Kindle and a paperback. And if you're interested in telling your story with us, please reach out with your name and email address to set up an interview. Email me at powerofpatient@gmail.com. I'm Bree Allison for the Power of the Patient Project, the National Library of Patient Rights and Advocacy. Thank you for watching.